Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Edna Kowenje from the Africa Research and Impact Network, and we at ARIN are pleased to welcome you to this session where we're going to be delving on Africa in the Global Goal on Adaptation, the first of a four-part webinar series in the lead up to COP30. Before we begin, I'd like to just set a few ground rules. We have interpretation for the session. So if you want to listen to either in English or French, please press the globe button at the bottom of your screen, where you will be able to choose the channel in which you want to listen into. Another thing is I kindly ask you to keep all your microphones muted unless you're speaking. If you'd like to speak, please feel free to raise up your hand and the host will give you a chance to speak. Alternatively, you can wait until the end of the session where we are going to have a dedicated question and answer session. Otherwise, I wish us all an active participation and I'd like to hand it over to Leah for the welcoming remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Edna. I'll just be sharing a few slides with us. Please confirm that you can see my slides.
Yes, we can. Just put them in presentation mode.
All right. So my name is Leah Aoko from the Africa Research and Impact Network, and really welcoming you to this webinar where we are unpacking the global goal on adaptation, what it means for this continent, its relevance, and how we can meaningfully contribute to this discourse. As we begin, I'm going to invite us to reflect a bit on the Africa Research and Impact Network, what we do as an organization, and how we can all be involved. So generally, ARIN is a network of over 200 fellows across the continent. So we have talented early career researchers, policymakers, and various stakeholders who join us to promote and demonstrate research excellence across the region. We also engage in development and implementation of grant projects. We have worked with several funders, including the IDRC, Wellcome Trust, and the Science for Africa Foundation. So this is just a general overview of our presence across Africa. Our regional focal points include East Africa at Makerere University, West Africa, University of Ghana, Southern Africa, that is Copperbelt, Central Africa and Francophone, that is in Senegal, and diaspora, that is at Melbourne University. In terms of our stakeholder database, we have engaged actively with over 5,000 stakeholders whom we interact with through various convenings in our projects. So thematic disciplines that we work in at the Africa Research and Impact Network with our fellows include sustainable development. I think we are all familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals that is globally recognized, climate change and energy, which is now an emerging discourse, cities and resilience in enhancing pro-poor urban planning, agriculture and forestry, mining, trade and industry, which is also another upcoming area, technology and innovation. We've recently completed research work on climate resilience and AI. So some of our
Hello, Leah, sorry. Your slides are not transitioning. If you could have it on presentation mode. Yeah.
Can you see them now? They're pretty clear on my end. Can you see them?
No, Leah, they're not moving. I think if you could just stop sharing and try again.
All right. Okay. Are you able to see them?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see my slides? Please confirm.
Yes, we can, Leah.
All right. Great. Thank you. So just picking up from where we had left off, some of our analytical approaches include research and forecasting, policy analysis and convening and influence, capacity gap support, knowledge systems, and partnerships and strategy, which we thrive at. So our flagship initiatives, and really this is an exciting part of the work that we do at ARIN, include Capture platform, that is the climate and health consultative platform. And this really was birthed from research work that we did funded by Wellcome Trust, where we realized a huge silo and gap between practitioners in climate change and the health sector. And so we just wanted to have a platform where transdisciplinary research and convenings and partnerships can be forged, hence Capture platform. We have the Llama platform. Some of us have interacted with the locally led Adaptation Metrics for Africa platform. We've been engaging various stakeholders and partners under the Step Change program that is funded by the IDRC. And this really is to profile national, county level adaptation metrics. We're also ambitiously looking to profile bottom-up indicators for adaptation. And part of the discussions that we'll be having during this pre-COP webinar series, that is webinar 3, is on community indicators and whose indicators matter when we are talking about adaptation at the global level. So staying tuned for that discussion. So that is on Llama platform. We are also leading the Africa Annual State of Evidence report. We are calling it the SOA report, but really focusing on adaptation progress in thematic areas that are crucial to the global goal on adaptation, including infrastructure, water, energy sector, just to name but a few. So those are some of the flagship initiatives that we are currently working on. Other perhaps notable activities that we do under the Africa Research and Impact Network include the Friday reviews, which some of us again participate in. We have a fellowship program currently being run under Accountable Adaptation. We have also released recently a call for fellows for AI fellowship, which again is funded by the IDRC. And finally, we have a publication mentorship partnership with the Taylor and Francis, which is geared towards strengthening research excellence across the region. So thank you. That's just a brief on the Africa Research and Impact Network. At this juncture, I'd like us to have a quick run through how the program is going to take off. We'll have a presentation on the GGA process, the Global Goal on Adaptation, from Charles Tonui, who is actively participating in the Belém working group, and will be able to expound more on what this means for us as stakeholders in the adaptation arena. After that, we'll have a brief reflection from Carl Schultz. I may have mispronounced that, but Carl is coming to us from IPAM, and he'll be able to sort of explain more about how their work is contributing to the global goal on adaptation discourse. We'll then have a brief reflection from Elizabeth Gilmore, who is joining us to discuss on building on the foundational objectives on the global goal on adaptation. What are the key milestones? What are the challenges of the process? And then we'll have a brief sort of break where we will have a poll for all of us as key stakeholders on how the GGA, how we interact with the GGA in our daily work. And then, of course, we'll be able to have questions and comments and interact during the plenary before we close down the webinar. So that is just a brief of what we are going to be interacting with today. I'd like to invite Charles Tonui. Charles, please confirm that you can hear us loud and clear. I invite him to just share his screen so that we can get a concise background on the global goal on adaptation under the Paris Agreement. Charles, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you, Leah.
Please go ahead. I welcome you to share your screen. Even as he does that, maybe just a small preface to it is that the global goal on adaptation is focused on strengthening resilience and reducing vulnerability. And the crucial aspect of this discussion is that we're asking ourselves as stakeholders from the global south, how can we actively interact with this process? And we've had partners telling us, some of us do not understand what the global goal on adaptation entails. Hence, the crucial need to unpack this and just look at how we can strengthen resilience from the global south perspective. Yes, Charles, you can put it on presentation mode. Thank you. All right, just waiting for Charles's presentation in a few minutes.
Okay, please help me to present from yes, to share the slide from your end.
Sorry, are you able to share now?
Yes.
Okay, waiting on you with that. As we had earlier introduced, part of the challenges that we face in interacting with this discourse is on financing adaptation. As partners we interact with, say, we know these are the crucial aspects that need adaptation funding, but what informs the priorities and who informs the priorities? Hence the crucial discussion on the global goal on adaptation from Africa's perspective. Over to you, Charles.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much, Alea, and thank you for the participants present. I'm Charles Tranui. I'm a member of the Africa Research and Impact Network, and I'm going to share largely for those who have not been participating actively in the climate change discussions. I've prepared some slides just for your information, and also looking at some of these abbreviations, which sometimes we have realized when we are cascading down most of these global discussions, we use abbreviations whereby some of the participants sometimes find it a struggle to really comprehend or understand. So GGA refers to the global goal on adaptation, but let me bring in where it all started. So the global goal on adaptation is anchored on the Paris Agreement, which is a legally binding international treaty on climate change, and it was adopted by 195 parties. Those are the member states of the United Nations. At COP21, that is the United Nations Conference of Parties, number 21, in 2015 in Paris. And the main goal of this agreement is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 for sub-Saharan Africa to the impacts of climate change, and provides a framework for financial assistance to developing nations. Now, the global goal on adaptations is anchored on Article 7, and the main focus is to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change, but also with a view to contributing to sustainable development and ensuring that there is an adequate adaptation response in the context of the temperature goal referred in Article 2, that is limiting it to be well below 2 degrees and also pursue efforts to limit the increase to 1.5. So the agreement introduced the concept of global goal on adaptation, which is parallel to the global mitigation call aimed at limiting global temperatures to 1.5. But unlike mitigation, which is also supported by the agreement, where progress can be tracked using a single metric, adaptation requires more complex approach. So this is one of the key aspect that is appreciated around adaptation. Now, the UNEP global network really mobilized stakeholders across the globe, and it ran several consultations at the regional level. And you'll be introducing to you also the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program on global goal and adaptation. And Glasgow means there was a conference of parties in Glasgow, and also Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Glasgow is in Scotland, and then Sharm el-Sheikh is in Egypt. So there was also subsequent follow-up conference of parties, that is COP26, which set for the series of workshops and negotiations to establish an operationalization framework for the global goal on adaptation, which was finally agreed upon at COP28, that is, which was held in Dubai. Now, the UNEP's Global Adaptation Network undertook a series of regional webinars, and Africa was included in that too, which gathered insights and understanding at regional level, some perspectives and priorities on global goal and adaptation. So some of the aspects which are really captured at these regional discussions. One was the urgency of collective action and responsibility, integration of adaptation and mitigation, which the agreement is really pursuing, and then also facilitation of equity, rights, and justice, which is also a priority for Africa, and transformational adaptation. We have also the global governance and cooperation, which COP28 actually really pursued it very strongly as a pivotal juncture for finalizing and operationalizing the GGA framework and aligning global adaptation efforts. One was also the capacity building, looking at the institutional support, technical and financial capabilities as part of the means of implementation of the global goal on adaptation. Youth and future generations were also key outcome, and learning and iterative processes, looking at the GGA framework, that it will be evolving, and there'll be a lot of sharing, learning, and feedback around the GGA. But let's come to the aspects which are relevant to Africa's during that consultations led by the UNEP Global Adaptation Network. So the GGA needs to recognize the unique vulnerabilities faced by African countries. This because despite their contributing only 4% of global emissions, Africa bears the brunt of climate risk and impacts. The GGA process also must address the adaptation financial gap, which Leah has already mentioned, and empower local communities in Africa. In addition, also, Africa faces substantial gap in climate adaptation finance, and current commitments fall short of estimated 52.7 billion USD annually required by African countries for effective adaptation. Also, GGA means mobilizing more financial resources to support African nations in building resilience and implementation of adaptation measures. The GGA also should emphasize inclusivity and justice, especially by bridging the gap between the national policies and local actions, and ensure that the most vulnerable communities, including the youth, women, have a say in decision-making processes and benefits from the climate adaptation initiatives. And if you look at the picture, which in these slides, looking at the Africa on the front line of climate change, looking at climate calls for the climate resilient index, you realize that the sub-Saharan Africa is still really facing dynamic vulnerabilities. The GGA also necessitates the use of scientific assessments and metrics to set clear targets and measures, and African countries can leverage scientific evidence strategies that address their specific needs. And this is where we are going to really delve further into looking at now the indicator question, which is being pursued currently. So for Africa, the GGA represents an opportunity to address its vulnerability to climate change, ensure long-term resilience, and access to much-needed adaptation finance. The continent also must prioritize adaptation, empowering local communities, ensure inclusivity and justice in adaptation measures, while also leveraging scientific evidence and aligning with the current work on the IPCC assessment, which will be critical in formulating effective adaptation strategies for Africa's sustainable development achievement. There is also another parallel activity, not parallel activity, but really that can build synergies, what we call the global stock tech. And there've been a lot of conversations to really look at how both can be linked, the GGA and the global stock tech, which at COP28, there was presentations around that. And the GGA process, especially on the indicators, will be concluded in the upcoming conference of parties. But the most important component from the conversation is that the GST, that's the Global Stocktake, and the GTA process should inform each other, and that the framework should contribute to the Global Stocktake of also the GTA. And this one is very important in terms of considering the adaptation is a very complex process. Now, let me share the outlook of the UAE PLM work program on indicators now for measuring the progress towards achieving the global goal on adaptation. And yeah, UAE means the United Arab Emirates. That is where COP28 was held. And PLM is based in Brazil, where the Conference of Parties number 29 will be held. And that is where the conclusion on indicators for measuring global goal on adaptation will be held. So the work of the operationalizing or implementing the global goal on adaptation is the mandate of the Conference of Parties, serving as the committee, as the meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement, the CMA. These are the supreme body of the agreement responsible for overseeing, and it takes decisions to promote the effectiveness of effective implementation of the agreement. Now, at the CMA3 now, it established and launched a 2-year program, a 2-year Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program on global goal on adaptation, which was carried out by the subsidiary bodies. One is the subsidiary body of Scientific and Technological Advice, there's a SABSTA, and subsidiary body of the implementation, SPI. So I'll be using SP, or you'll be seeing like SP, meaning that the subsidiary bodies. The CMA5, it concluded the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program and adopted the United Arab Emirates framework for global climate resilience. And also at the same time, it launched the 2-year United Arab Emirates PLM work program on indicators now, which is focusing on the indicators for measuring global goal on adaptation progress. Also at the CMA5, there was also the subsidiary bodies, both were held, that's at 60th, which requested the chairs the chairs of the subsidiary body of Scientific and Technological Advice and subsidiary body for implementation to convene technical experts to assist in the technical work under the United Arab Emirates PLM program on indicators. That was last year when it started. So what are some of the target areas under the UAE global climate resilience? So these are some of the targets, but also sectors which are also a priority to Africa. One was the water supply and sanitation, food and agriculture production, which are in is one of the expert organizations supporting. Health impacts and health services, ecosystem and biodiversity, infrastructure and human settlement, poverty eradication, and livelihoods and cultural and heritage. And then also looking at the means of implementation or the dimensional targets. So looking at the impact, vulnerability and risk assessment, planning, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation. So the timelines, where we are now, the SP62 just concluded, and but the whole process from CMA5 they did facilitate the mobilization of close to 9,000 indicators globally. But then the work of the expert group was to support the chairs by defining and tagging and really aggregating the indicators, because the decision was to have not more than 100 indicators. So I'll take you also from now, SP, what have we achieved, or the process towards achieving the current outputs. So the discussions will conclude at COP30, that is in November, December 2025 in Brazil, whereby the refined indicators will be presented. Now, the guidance to the experts for work in 2025 to enhance collaboration was under CMA 6, paragraph 16, which really provided that measurability and data availability, especially looking at indicators, and also established and available metrics, availability to use available data, ability to use the available data, and relevance to multiple thematic targets. That is what the indicators should focus on, and also output and outcome-oriented indicators. Additional criteria when considering indicators were also highly welcome. But the main decision is the manageability of these indicators. That meaning that there should be a manageable set of 100 indicators which are globally applicable, but also there should be a menu capturing different adaptation contexts. So there'll be the main indicators and the sub-indicators, and also that can enable assessment of progress towards the framework targets. So some of the progress which I've already shared in summary is that 78 experts were convened from last year, and a compilation of 9,000 indicators was submitted to the UNFCCC Secretariat. And this was supported by 5 mandated workshops. 2 were held in 2024, that's last year, and 2 already been held this year. And then 1 or 2 might remain towards COP30. So you can download the list using the link below, and then also you can access the expert organizations for further consultations or really getting more direction or details around these indicators or the processes. So in conclusion, the SABSTA 62 SP meetings, that is SABSTA 62 and SPI 62, one of the decision was really looking at avoiding placing an additional reporting burden on parties, because remember, some of right now the BTR, that's a biannual transparency report, is being done. Also, the work on NDCs and more of reporting at the national and maybe and also on different aspects. So the final outcome of the UAE PLM work program may include a manageable set of not more than 100 indicators, and the indicators which have been summarized so far or consolidated, aggregated from the 9,000 to now 490. You can look at this table, and this is what the technical expert group will be also focusing on in consultation with the chairs and other expert platforms like the international platform for adaptation metrics, which is represented by Kalia, in terms of refining these 400 now to 100. So there is more work that will be done, and likely there'll be workshop around July and September this year. And that is when most of the discussions around maybe looking at the additional and also refining the methodologies, and because different groups were using different methodologies in terms of refining their indicators. And this is some of the decisions also which came out of the SP62, which I've already mentioned, that there will be continuous work for the technical group going up to 2025 July and also September, just to review the indicators. And also there was very concrete decision by the chairs that they should not be more than 100. And they provided options 1 and 2, where a small number of headline indicators that are applicable globally, and each headline indicator may be accompanied by a number of sub-indicators to capture various local and national contexts. And remember, for Africa, we are looking at local, further even at the village level to local, to the sub-national, and also to the national in terms of disaggregated indicators. But then at the GTA process, we are looking at which ones which are applicable at the global level. Also, option 2 is a 2 list of indicators, 1 list of global core as referred in paragraph 20 of decision 3 CMS 6, and 1 list constituting a menu of options as referred to in paragraph 20B of that decision. So meaning that a menu of options, meaning capturing the different agroecological zones, considering also for the case of Africa, we have got an heterogeneous ecosystem. So you find island, savanna, grassland, rainforest, you have got the wetlands, and of course in other continents also. So that is being taken care of, and also with the experts representing Africa, courtesy of a nomination by the Africa Group of Negotiators and the UNFCCC. Arin and the team will be able to really support the whole process to ensure that Africa's perspectives, priority indicators are really captured by end of the process. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward for your comments and questions and then discussions. Thank you so much. Back to you, Leah. Edna, back to you.
Thank you so much, Charles, for that elaborate presentation and a very wholesome introduction to the GGA process. At least the audience now has a brief background on what the process is, its aims, and what we aim to achieve in the coming future. So at this point, if I look at my program, we are going to have some reflection on the GGA process from Carl. Carl is here with us. So Carl, please feel free to proceed.
Thank you, Edna. And thank you, Leah and Charles, for giving some very useful context that I think helps to really frame where we're at. I'm going to, there we go. Does everyone see the slides?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Great. Okay. So I think I'd like to start out by just noting that while I'm hopeful that there's going to be a global agreement regarding these indicators, the challenge are just beginning, and that is because there could be an agreement, there hopefully will be, but it could be locally meaningless depending on where we go from here. There's a concern, of course, that metrics risk becoming fragmented and really not associated with the practices down to the project level, down to the community level. There's also a concern that many of the indicators will focus on inputs and not measurable outcomes. And this is, I think, important that we consider. Thirdly, I think there's a real need for metrics. And I'm not only referring to the 100 indicators, I'm referring to the implementation indicators that have to be usable and scalable and coherent. And there needs to be alignment across the various frameworks. It's not just the Paris Agreement, it's not just climate change, but there are so many other agreements and frameworks that have to work together, or we could have challenges at the national and local levels. So just to start out, I should tell you a little bit about IPAM. IPAM really was started, in a sense, during the COP in Morocco, which was viewed as an adaptation COP. And there was a conference immediately prior to it to guide the discussion on adaptation metrics. It was formalized in 2020 in the heart of the pandemic, and has grown to be over 160 members from 44 countries, and 16 institutions are members of it. IPAM has developed a variety of core tools, including something called the AMI framework I'll touch upon. It's hosted a variety of different global webinars on adaptation metrics pertinent issues, and it's been involved in policy engagement from the perspective of metrics orientation. And its real focus is advancing transdisciplinary adaptation metrics and just making metrics work. So this is just a little bit on where we're at. We're global. We have a slightly higher number of representatives from the global south, but we're balanced across most of the world. And I'd urge you to consider, if you're interested in the issues of adaptation metrics, to consider joining, either as an individual member, institutional member, or just sign up for our newsletters. But let me get to the subject at hand today. Here's a little more on what we're doing. We've got newsletters, we've got task groups. We're working on one right now. You referenced AI. And so we're concerned that the use of AI for adaptation metrics needs some guiding principles to ensure that the use is appropriate. We've co-authored a variety of papers. We've advised on the GGA work program. 9 of our members are members of the UAE BLEM experts group, and we've collaborated internally to help support that set of experts and to encourage thought out adaptation indicators, considerations. And right now we're working on co-authoring a report on adaptation metrics, global goals, not the GGA, global goals. And we're looking forward to hosting a conference in Morocco later this year. So just real quick, I mean, I think it's important that we consider, how do you evaluate indicators and metrics? And so for that reason, we've developed an approach that can be applied for evaluating it. And it's been applied in a variety of different contexts. And I'd urge you, if you're thinking about what are the approaches to consider it, that you have a look at this framework. We also have worked on a variety of different papers, and we came up with a statement on adaptation metrics for global goals that you can have a look at. But the importance, I think, is to ensure that there's coherence across frameworks and focus. And so a lot of things I'm going to be talking about briefly today. This is the report that we're currently working on, and its aim is to align metrics with global frameworks, cover all scales and sectors, review the tools and the techniques that are applicable and can guide and support or hinder application of adaptation metrics, to try to bring in understandings of global practices in different contexts, to come up with a set of metrics criteria. And we're going to then take this report, and I've put the chapter headings there, and we're going to divide, have a 3-day workshop conference where we're going to, chapter by chapter, spend about a half a day discussing, evaluating, considering, and hopefully validating what we've done, and so that we can then present this at the COP in Brazil. So I mentioned that there's a risk that the indicators could be globally agreed upon, but locally not really very helpful. And that's because there's a number of challenges involved. There's a concern that there's fragmentation across frameworks. Does the Sendai agreement, does the global goal on adaptation, does the various frameworks that are out there, both within the UN system and outside of it, are they going to be working together? As I mentioned also, there's a concern over inputs versus outcomes orientation. There's a challenge, of course, with integration of local and non-state contributions. That's where the action happens when it comes to adaptation. And then there's a question whether the indicators will be implementation ready for different countries. That doesn't just apply to the work now, but it certainly applies overall. I mentioned that there are a variety of different global frameworks that the GGA needs to relate to. And I know that this is a consideration of the UE Belém group, but I don't want to just assume that it's going to work perfectly. You've got the SDGs, and we figure 146 of the 169 targets are affected by climate impacts. Then there's the Sendai Disaster Risk Reduction Agreement, where there's a risk that there could be alignment in terms of the need for better disaster risk reduction, but is there synergy between the metrics? There's other agreements on biodiversity and combating desertification. And the question is, these are very adaptation relevant, but are they integrated? I mean, this is a concern. And then another issue is, of course, there's 100 indicators, up to 100 indicators. Is there going to be duplication, overlap? Is this going to really work together? I think these are framework issues that need to be really carefully thought through, and it's not going to stop at Belém. But let's put this down to Africa. And we have a very large interest in Africa because we started in Africa. Also, Africa, as we know, has a very vulnerable population, and so adaptation is a highly urgent issue. There's also a concern that metrics need to really, as has been noted by our previous speakers, transmit local data to national and then global scales. And this happens in a limited and heterogeneous set of data available, Francophone, Anglophone, but not just that. Between different sectors, you could have the same indicators in water, for instance, in agriculture, effectively. But is the data going to be there? And are the tools, capacities there? There's also the question over really what's happening at the local level, and how does it really translate up to the global level? So some things that we have to look forward to, I think, are how can we align metrics with these national and subnational planning where the action is happening? How can we do a better job, not just with the indicators that we have coming out of Belém, but for implementation, to ensure that there's an outcome-based set of priorities in the metrics? How can we close the capacity gaps for implementation, which is particularly challenging where financial resources or human resources are very limited, so that the metrics can actually be applied and people can then have that information to make better decisions? And how also can we ensure that these global metrics can be adapted over time, because there's going to be changes in the climate? I note that the GGA is to be considering it within the context of the temperature goal, which is 2 degrees, aiming for 1.5 degrees. I hope we meet that goal. I really do. Am I confident? No. So we need to be thinking about, in my opinion, and I mean, it's important that we be thinking about how the changes in climate change the need for goals. And the goals at 2 degrees might be very different from some other temperature that we may face in the future. also, it needs to be adaptable to the knowledge we have of adaptation and adaptation metrics management and target setting. And it has to be adaptable to the socioeconomic and political realities. We've seen big changes just in the past couple of years in political realities. We have a headwind right now, and we need to be considering then how can we make metrics that serve whatever realities we're in and can adapt to those. Looking forward also, there's the question over tools and enablers. How can we do this? And I think there, I would urge us to be continuing to, at all levels, be using good practices in measurement, and analytical tools like AMI are one option to assess the indicator quality and utility. In the global south, in Africa, there's need for initiatives such as LAMA. That's here. It's very pertinent to build capacities, to build Southern leadership. And I think it's also very important that there's institutional readiness and that there's learning, south-south, north-south, south-north, in terms of how we apply metrics. The problem is global. It happens in every country. There's going to be changes, and there's going to be need for adaptation and ways of measuring that adaptation. So a few thoughts in terms of the principles for this future is, I mean, we need to have coherence, but we can't have it be uniform because it's not going to work if it's uniform. We need to have dynamic metrics that are aligned with these evolving realities that we face. And we need to balance global comparability, which is very, very important and can trigger finance, can trigger better policy making, can trigger a better understanding of what we need to prioritize. But also, we have to balance this with the local meaning. How does this mean something at the farm level, at the community level, at the city level? It's very important that we get this right. We're not going to get it perfect, but we've got to work on it. And so just a few final reflections. So the GGA and the UE-BELEM indicators, it's a milestone. And I laud those who've been working very hard over the past couple of years on the challenges and over the many years. But it needs to be shaped for usability. Metrics need to really enable, not constrain adaptation. And there's a risk that metrics could constrain adaptation if they're not accessible, right? And now is really a moment. I mean, as was mentioned earlier, and I think we all know, adaptation is a big priority in Africa. Africa didn't really cause this problem, climate change. But it also is true that Africa has the potential to be a leader in adaptation metrics, be a leader in terms of pointing the way for what is good adaptation. How do we measure it? How do we know that we're progressing? And therefore we can go forward better, more effectively, and reduce the vulnerability, enhance the resilience and the adaptive capacity of all communities and people. That's my talk. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you so much, Carl, for your very thoughtful and reflective discussion on the GGA process in the context of other global processes. Indeed, it is important for us to recognize that even as we champion for adaptation actions, then global processes like the GGA really needs to be informed by local priorities. Just a quick reflection where you say that 146 out of 169 SDG targets are affected by climate change. So it is really up to us adaptation actors to prioritize our adaptation priorities and the involvement of local communities. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Elizabeth Gilmore. Elizabeth is also an expert in the BELEM work program, and she will be building on the foundational objectives of the Global Goal on Adaptation. She's going to take us through some key milestones and challenges of the process. Elizabeth, you're welcome.
Greetings from Ottawa, Canada, and thank you so much for having me here today on this webinar. I'm going to talk without slides, and I'm really talking from my own perspective today as one of the 78 members of the technical expert group. A very little bit about myself. I'm a professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, and I was a lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change during the 6th cycle. My work focuses on how we connect science and policy to build meaningful ways for adapting to climate change and living more equitably and justly in a climate change world. And I'd like to first start by thanking Charles and Carl for giving so much background, especially with sort of that alphabet soup that characterizes a lot of the climate change, especially the international negotiation space of it. And I'm really excited about the timing of this conversation because just this morning we all got the conclusion text from SB 62. I can tell you that the expert group is sort of actively reading it right now, trying to make some sense of it. So I won't say that my comments today are sort of the full breadth of the next steps, but I'm certainly excited that we are at a place where the SB 62 text provided a clear next step for the technical expert group. I think for those of you who may have followed some of this, I mean, this has been a complex and often difficult process. It is also deeply important to the effort to operationalize the global goal. I've been asked to talk about, I think, sort of 3 key points, to talk a little bit about the key milestones, where we are now, to reflect a bit on the challenges and tensions that we've been navigating. And also what I thought was a really well-posed question from the organizers of, is the GGA all about indicators? So I think really to begin, I mean, Charles has already said, the global goal on adaptation was established in the Paris Agreement. But for many, many years, it has lacked really a clear shape. Conceptually, it may have been framed as somewhat analogous to the 1.5 degree or the temperature targets in the Paris Agreement, so the 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius, which was meant to guide the global efforts on mitigation. But perhaps it's been put a bit to the side, in part because adaptation, as we know from the IPCC report that I helped co-author, is that adaptation is harder to quantify, and is certainly context dependent. So when we start to think about how do we measure progress on something like this, especially at a global level, it starts to engage with both the differences across countries, sectors, and communities, but also looking for what is it that a globally resilient world, resilient communities, resilient space in a climate change world would look like. And so with the launch of the UAE Belém work program, it really set in place this structured process to work towards defining and measuring adaptation progress. The technical experts were convened, I think, with due consideration. I can tell you that as a group of 78, it has just been an honor and a privilege to be to be one of them. This is a group that represents, every region, everyone from academics like myself to those who are deeply involved and custodians of many of the present UN indicator sets, to researchers and, from sort of all walks of life, as well as multiple experts from civil society. We have worked since we've been convened and we've had a couple of workshops along the way, probably the most notable being the one held in March in Bonn. to work towards a consolidated list of potential indicators. And this has really been a substantial amount of technical work and has involved a lot of sort of, all the expertise that the technical experts bring, as well as the multiple reports that have been produced by stakeholder organizations. And so, for example, in the report that my theme, so I am linked with the ecosystem and biodiversity theme, we specifically indicate in our report the stakeholder groups that we were able to directly speak with in the lead up to our report that we presented during the workshop on the first day of the SBs, but also sort of have a number of other groups. So certainly it's really to emphasize that the expert groups, we are we are people. I should also note that we are volunteers in this process, but volunteers who are taking this very seriously. And so if you have not already, I would encourage you to reach out to the relevant technical experts to share your information. What we've done so far, and ENB actually sort of, I could have thought they couldn't have said it better. They said it was almost miraculous. And I'm not sure that's exactly what happened, but we really worked very hard to take what was a very long list of 9,000, some indicators, some ideas of what could be measured, all the way down to about the 490 indicators that we brought into the SB 62. So we've done a lot, but what we also heard from the parties was just how far we have to go. 490 indicators could stretch the capacity of the parties to make sense of and that they are, and at the conclusion of the SBs, it had become very clear that they would like the technical expert group to continue to proceed towards continuing to refine the 490 indicators to approximately 100. One thing that I want to unpack a little bit with you is sort of the conception that we have this long list and we're busy sort of taking one and putting it into the no column and taking another and putting it into the yes. We're very careful, I think, to use the word refine. Many of these indicators need a lot of work in order to be ready for the global goal on adaptation. And so what you're seeing is not potentially, while we get to the end, sort of specific indicators picked from that list, but rather this list being used as a point of departure towards a strong set for and specifically tailored for the GGA. In addition to thematic mandates, which we call sort of the para nines, which, for example, 9D is the one that is elaborating the ecosystem and biodiversity theme. And so we need to pick indicators that fit that mandate. The experts were also given a set of cross-cutting criteria, and those engage with dimensions of equity, with vulnerable populations, vulnerable ecosystems, as well as probably what is the big one, which is means of implementation. I should also mention, in addition to the thematic cycles, there's also para 10, which outlines the adaptation cycle. And so somewhat magically, the technical experts are supposed to take this and refine it into 100 indicators. And so right now, that's where we find ourselves. So it's really good news. The value of the technical experts has been recognized, and this work will proceed. And I have to say that it didn't feel like that was guaranteed in the SBs. But I think what it speaks to is the need to ensure that the GGA is rooted in the best technical and scientific information available. And so there will be, sort of following into the summer, a dedicated expert-only workshop that has been approved by the parties. And I think that really is the strongest sign that they would like us to continue our efforts, and they've given us the time, the space, and the resources to do so. But I think we have to be really clear-eyed about what we're setting up here and about some of the difficulties. And so I want to talk a little bit to the tensions, and as well as being a little bit clear about what can be technical and what may be political, and also how that line can sometimes feel a little bit unclear, especially in these spaces. And so as we went through SB 62, and the parties looked at what the experts had done and started to think through what they needed to see in order to meet their political goals within the GGA. There started to be a number of issues that arose, and you see these now reflected in, I think, and I'm so sorry, I was just looking at the text a second ago. And don't worry, these texts can be really a little difficult to read. In para 15 of the final decision text. And here there was a number of things that really arose that the technical expert group is going to have to take very seriously. The need especially to link every indicator to adaptation, to be adaptation specific or adaptation relevant. Now, this can be a bit challenging because I think that as technical experts, we knew that there's so much that goes into adaptation. There's impacts, there's vulnerability, there's exposure, and then there's the ability to moderate that exposure and the effectiveness of the adaptation efforts. And some of what was provided to the parties left them with the feeling that these indicators were not fit for purpose. The next steps, however, into adapting them to be adaptation specific puts us in a little bit of a challenge. On one hand, one of the reasons why we started to look so much at existing indicators is that they are very well developed. They come with metadata. So metadata is sort of the thing attached to it so that you know it works. You know what data to find, you know where some of the limitations of that data may be, and you're able to generate a coherent set of indicators such that we could look at the cumulative picture. But adapting these, in some ways, is like creating a new indicator. So the experts have a lot of work to do there. It was also stressed, and Carl touched on this point, that all indicators really must be measuring output and outcomes. And for adaptation, where sometimes we're looking at multiple outcomes, including co-benefits, this can present, again, some definitional challenges, but one where I think the experts, again, have a lot of value to add. The means of implementation was probably where we got the most stuck. And I think for anyone who has followed these negotiations for as long as they have will understand why. The indicators that relate, to finance, to capacity, and to technology are critical to having, to meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement. It's really what helps parties address the needs and gaps that the global goal on adaptation is meant to meet. But identifying these, defining these, and making them relevant is still really in progress. And so at one point, it felt like the parties were going to try to be very, very specific. Don't include ODA, don't include national budgets. When we look at the final text, it's a little bit more balanced in that it allows it to go back to the experts in order to really try to identify indicators for means of implementation. And so I think, again, these are really politically charged topics. Everyone agrees they matter, but defining indicators that reflect really the fairness, responsibility, and access is difficult. And so I think the technical experts may not have much of a summer vacation this year. There's still some lack of clarity in the text for what becomes political back to technical. But I think what's also clear is the experts are on a tight timeline. We've been asked to submit a final technical report and a new indicator list in August. And so even if you interpret that as August 31st, that's an incredible tight amount of time to try to bring more clarity. But I think the experts really are on board for this. I think that final question, I just really want to touch on it, which is the GGA then really all about indicators, or even worse, a list of indicators? And I think that's really the tension that we've been living through in this process. I think where we have such strong agreement is that indicators are central. They're really about supporting transparency, accountability. Perhaps even more importantly, they tell us about learning. What we're doing now towards where we need to be is a very long route, and these indicators can support the type of experiments and learning, monitoring, evaluation that that could bring us there much faster than some of the trial and error we're doing now. But I think it's really also about understanding that this technical process is really just to support what is a very political process. And by political here, I don't mean the sort of politicians. I mean the process through which we can test our values and the things we care about. The GGA is really an incredibly ambitious attempt to measure adaptation and trying to reflect all its complexity and its lived reality. So in some ways, I think the GGA is about indicators, but it is also deeply not just about indicators. It's about the things that we value. It's about how we choose to measure things because they reflect the things that we need to prioritize. And so, when we call it a list, I think we're really stripping it of its power. The list would look potentially very narrow. It could potentially focus on things that are just easily quantifiable. And I think the risks relate to really sidelining voices, some of the experiences that don't fit neatly into metrics. I can give you an example as it relates to the theme of biodiversity and ecosystems, which is related to Indigenous knowledge and local knowledge. But I assure you that these are things that the technical experts have definitely at the top of their minds. And so how this is going to work, well, as a technical expert, at a certain point, I have the ability to send this back to the political process. But I think really it's not just a measurement tool. Ultimately, this should be a signal. Adaptation is urgent, and it's as much a collective priority as mitigation needs to be. And so I think as the technical expert group, and that effort winds down as the negotiators go into COP30, this is really going to be a pivotal moment. And I hope that it's one that results in real progress. Thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you, Professor Gilmore, for that really useful intervention. Already inspired, and I can see some of the questions and comments in the chat section. And I'll just take opportunity, because I see Carl is also still on call with us, to pose a few questions. Yes, Carl, thank you for staying on call with us. You have rightfully put it that there's a lot of indicators. I think in Charles's presentation, he spoke about 9,000 indicators. And so the question that I'd be posing is, how do you ensure that these indicators are globally recognized, but also locally grounded? What is the opportunity there? And you may not have all the answers right now, but just reflect on some of the tensions at the global level and the local, the indicators remaining locally relevant. And for Professor Gilmore, really strong reflections there. And maybe for me, I'd be interested to know, you've mentioned about the indicators being tailor-made for the GGA. And we know that this GGA process is geared towards strengthening vulnerabilities, climate resilience. Again, how are we engaging the local groups, the local communities? I think that is the same reflection in the chat. So yeah, a useful, just a quick minute response to that would be much appreciated. Thank you. Over to you, Carl, then Professor Gilmore.
Yeah, it was good to use the word tension, because, and tension isn't always bad, right? Tension can be very constructive. And it's true, there are tensions between different scales. And it relates to a number of different factors. A few of them are, well, what's the nature of the decision that has to be made that's informed by different indicators? And so let's envision a decision that needs to be made at the farm level. What information is required there? And then let's consider, well, what information needs to be required at a conference of party when there's further developments on international agreements? You're dealing at one level with a farmer, maybe a loan officer at a bank, maybe extension office, and then you're dealing with people in the village, maybe, who have needs, and then you've got people who consume the food. Okay, then let's think about who goes to a COP. Very few of those people go to a COP, right? It tends to be people more like us, you know. We have very different interests. What we're trying to achieve is perhaps articulated very differently from what that farmer needs to achieve, although it ultimately flows, and it needs to flow. That information needs to flow from the farm level to the capital cities where decisions are being made, and to the banks and the multilateral development banks and all of those, right? So you both need to consider the context. What does a farmer need to better understand if they should set up a micro irrigation system? And is that micro irrigation system working? And then what does that, let's just say this world banker need to make a decision about a multi-billion-dollar investment? They're not going to need that level of granularity, right? But the information needs to flow. So I'll just focus on that. There's so many other challenges. But if you're talking scale, I think the information and what sort of decisions have to be made needs to both be taken into account, but also needs to inform the other types of decisions that have to be made at different scales. I'll just leave it at that. But there's so many other elements to that, as we all know, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so like thanks for setting up probably one of our more challenging questions. And this idea of sort of tailor-made for the GGA. I think it starts with first recognizing the opportunity. You know, that the GGA is potentially it could be a remarkable instrument. It could be a very broad guide towards where we need to helping us understand where our resources are now and how to guide more resources to where they are needed. And I think that's what we mean when we say tailor-made. But there are going to, and I really do think the word tension here is not meant in a bad way. It's really meant to highlight that that, I think it was, saying that, we can't let the perfect here be the thing that stops us from the urgency. And so some ways of thinking about it are to start with a set of indicators that we have now, that we can measure reliably, that can start to give us a picture, but that these indicators start to form a framework, not just a list, but a framework that can be used and refined over time. Recognizing that our adaptation needs and our aspirations around adaptation will also change over time. And so here, thinking about the global picture doesn't mean that the local isn't also captured, but that we're looking at it in this very sort of iterative way, such that, we're going to start, and then we get to start seeing how local banks, for example, are reacting to it. We start to motivate changes throughout the system, and then have the opportunity, and this is where it really goes back to the negotiators, is whether they can set in place a accountable and transparent system through which they will also agree to take this information, review, revise, and then help us on that next set of years. And so I think we have to understand this as a point of departure and not as something that is as static as mitigation, sort of like the mitigation goals, but rather one that continues to be refined, especially one that is refined along development pathways, and one that is refined with respect to the other parts of the Paris Agreement, including the mitigation, our progress on mitigation. I know that's not sort of an easy answer, but I think that if we're looking for an easy answer in the GGA, then we're not going to find it. But what we can do is ensure that ambition is in there. And I think that is really the critical part, that we're measuring and monitoring the ambitions and aspirations that we have, and ensuring that we don't let this fail. And so I'm sort of enthusiastic in many ways.
Yeah, really interesting. And thanks, Prof. and Carl, for that. I know we are morphing into the plenary question and answer, and still just requesting for indulgence from our panelists and key speakers to stay on call for a few more minutes so that we can engage with the stakeholders herein. John Benson, you had a question. Would you want to unmute and ask your question on the GGA and climate finance for our speakers to reflect on? Are you able to unmute? Please let me know. Can you unmute?
Yes, I'm able to unmute.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Asking a question on climate finance, and I wrote it on the chat. As we now develop the GGA indicators, how will the process measure whether climate finance actually reaches local actors, not just national institutions? You know that most of the time when this finance reaches this country, it is somehow top down. Now we want to see whether these things will reach our local actors in the grassroots level. So how will these GGA indicators try to embed in that?
All right. Thanks, Benson. I'll give this to Carl and a few sentiments from Prof as well. Carl?
Well, I'm not one of the experts on the, so I don't, I think Elizabeth can give you better insights in terms of those actual, indicators. I can generalize. That's very, very possible. So you raise a good point, that there's so much trickling down. And really, when you think about it, the real action happens at the foundation, at the level of people, right? Yeah, sure, it happens at the level of big investments for flood defenses or infrastructure. Yes, yes, yes. But even that tends to be not an international decision made. It's a decision perhaps that a multilateral will get into, but it's something that ultimately a city or a district is where it's going to happen, right? So the issue, just back to this one important reason we have indicators, is for decision making, right? And the other, of course, is to make a case, right? Which is an aspect of decision making, right? To make a case that something is important enough to fund, right? And so as you see that all this money trickles from the international or the national typically, and the information and these indicators need to inform that. Well, the question then is, well, okay, how does the indicators in the GGA, how do they inform the top level decisions that can then result in triggering of finance? Is they're not going to be deciding the same thing that a loan officer is, who's on the real front lines of, well, should I be doing something or not? Should I give a loan or not, right? And the information and the indicators are going to be overlap, but different, right? So this is where I get back to this scale issue. And that's that we need to consider the context under which decisions are being made, what sorts of decisions, and how can information translate from one scale to the other that's necessary. This is where the global indicators may help or they may hinder. You're not going to only use those indicators, of course, but can they allow for the information to go up, not just trickle down the money and all of that, but the information to go up to say this type of adaptation measure works, or these capacities are necessary if we're going to make a community more resilient. And so there is no answer except that this is a dynamic, iterative process. It's going to be something that every country is going to face and every district is going to face differently. But there needs to be cognizance of the importance of communicating between scales. And if we can enable that, then money can flow down to where it's needed and information can flow up, if we want to call it up, so that we know what to prioritize. I hope that's helpful, but Elizabeth could probably say more about the specifics of the 100 indicators we're going to see.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Go ahead, Prof.
Thank you. I think we're a long way from knowing what those final 100 indicators will be. But I think we have some signals that we can talk to on where we are with finance. I want to start though with one part that's sort of this element that's important to remember when we're talking about the UNFCCC system and the Paris Agreement. The reporting is done by countries. They own that process. And so what is reported will come at that level. They can choose to report. They may not be able to report on certain things. Certain things may not be relevant and so they would not report on some parts of it. It is also well understood that the GGA, much like the mitigation measures, are not meant to be used to compare. They are meant to be used to bring together a global picture. And so, yeah, that can leave the sense that that the local is not heard. Carl said earlier, those in these COP rooms are not the people who are the most affected. Now I think that's changing a little bit, but it has been very, very slow progress on that point. But I think here it's about understanding what that global picture is going to be able to give us. These are signals certainly will be signals certainly to the large funds. And we already see the Adaptation Fund, for example, taking on more local level initiatives. And so ensuring that it does not only need to be national bodies who receive that money, but that there are legitimate other actors who can receive and use that money and be accountable with it for meeting their locally led adaptation goals. And so I think that we can look to sort of the other parts of how the system works. I think it's also really contingent to recognize that climate finance as it stands right now is also sort of a very biased system in a way. It really favors sort of easy places to put it over the more challenging places. And so I think what we want to see in a set of indicators like this is really ones that can pick up those signals and ultimately can become the progressive guide for not just like little changes in terms of financial access and availability, but really ones that progressively would lead to the much larger changes that we know are needed for just, not just in climate finance, but even a little bit more systemically in how we roll this out. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Prof, for that really useful insight. I'd like to engage Charles Tonui because he presented initially on sort of the GGA and the indicators. I know that you have been working on this under the Belém working group as well. So Charles, if you are with us, kindly address this question still posed by Benson in the group. How does projects such as the Llama project, community project, locally led projects interact with the GGA indicators? Are they being represented in that discourse at that high level? Charles, if you're with us, kindly indulge us by reflecting on that briefly.
Yes, thanks, Leo, for that question. At this particular juncture, the experts participating are coming from different organizations and also implementing different projects. And I think that is one of the window for such projects to engage with networks like ARIN, and also we have the International Platform for Adaptation Metrics and other networks to really share their perspectives around the indicators, because you remember there'll be also sub-indicators and then the aggregation of those indicators. So projects, but through networks now, and those experts who are actively in the technical group, you can engage with them and engage also with platforms like the International Platform for Adaptation Metrics, which ARIN also is part of, and then also the other organizations or networks which are represented. So there is an opportunity to learn from. But I think for now, for the new indicators that will emerge, there'll be the last workshops, which so you need to share with the experts so that they can look at and share those perspectives here. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for that clarification. So indeed, there is an avenue for even local community groups to engage actively with the GGA process. I think IPAM is a great platform, and perhaps after this, we would do well to share some of the materials that they can engage with and sort of reach out. I know, Carl, you emphasized on the flow of information, which is really critical in this process. Fatumbai asks, in French, and perhaps I'd be a dual to interpret, 100 indicators. What is the source of these indicators? Is there a definition, a specific definition? I know for sure there isn't, but yeah, over to you, Carl, on this humongous number of indicators which presents a challenge to just bringing them down. Where do they come from is what Fatu is asking. Over to you, Carl.
Yeah, well, I may not be the best person to answer. Yeah, I mean, they came from different. There was a call for indicators, and so different organizations just gave them, and they were just there. And there was, I mean, Charles, Elizabeth, I know you've been working with these. There was redundancy, there was overlap, there was probably some things that you kind of wish were there but weren't presented, right? But it was that finite set of 9,000 that was the soil that you had to work with and build something from, or grow something from that, or winnow, or I don't know what you want to call. But it came from civil society. It came from, the Food and Agriculture Organization. It came from different parties. Yeah, but go ahead, please. Someone else who knows better.
Absolutely. Prof, you want to reflect on that as well?
Yeah, I can share that that this list that was given to the experts was we actually looked at it very, very carefully. And if you go back to some of our first reports, it was really trying to make sense of it. And so I can certainly confirm what Carl said. It was UN agencies. It was, we received many from other internal processes like the Adaptation Committee, which already is part of the UNFCCC architecture. We received ones from all sorts of research organizations, including CGAIR. They provided a lot, but so did so many others. There were indicators from national adaptation plans that countries have prepared themselves. And as Carl said, all the way down to sort of sometimes just a single indicator from a civil society group. I will say, I mean, the list was both amazing to look at, frustrating, not complete, but it did serve as really an incredible lens into the things that people care about. And I think that's really why I would say, like, this process doesn't end in Belém. That's like the beginning. And so, especially for groups like IPAM, like Llama, I mean, yes, there's going to be this very narrow window where the technical experts still will be working. And I would, again, I want to stress that I would still encourage you to try to send information and to try to engage. But that is not your only entry point. It is also with your negotiators, with your country teams, and then also as this is shaped post-Belém and it moves from sort of this list into implementation, that your groups will have will be much more powerful, in fact, than perhaps you may feel at this moment.
Thank you, Prof. Carl Charles. At this juncture, I'd like to invite Any other pending questions, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll give you an opportunity. But I'd like to invite Nancy, who is at hand to roll out a poll for us. So this poll is basically meant to leverage on our engagement through the discussions. I know not all of us are going to be able to chime in, but we can answer some questions through the poll, and then we can look at those as we wind up the webinar. So Nancy, if you're at hand to roll out the poll so that our audience can engage with that as we move to the final leg of the webinar. There it goes. I confirm I can see that on my screen, so kindly give us some of the information, the details, and we'll be happy to sample those responses afterwards. Thank you. We have 10 minutes to respond, so really happy to be receiving your responses so far. 10 minutes allocated to us. just have 1 more minute for the poll to end. 1 more minute. Many thanks. I hope we have had an opportunity to chime into the poll, and the results are in. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We see 19% of government stakeholders have joined us, NGO sector making the gist of our participants, community-based organizations, which are very crucial to engage when you're thinking about bottom-up indicators that can feed into the GGA process. Academia as well being represented, 13%, no donor representation, and others, I think, at 13%. That's really great engagement there. And so most of us, possibly from the session that we have had, have understood somewhat the GGA process at 81%, some thoroughly versed with it. I suspect these are responses from Professor Gilmore and Carl from IPAM, and probably Charles as well, but majority of the audience somewhat having an understanding of the GGS as has been presented and discussed today. Some of the barriers that are being faced in aligning national and local efforts. And again, this has been a point of reflection and tension when you're talking about global processes having local relevance. Of course, non-familiarity with the GGA process, I think, has stood out as one of the core issues. Many communities not being able to liaise with the progress of GGA indicators. I think we've seen a question from Francophone counterparts on where are these 9,000 indicators coming from, 100 indicators? And as Prof. Gilmore has rightfully put it, there's a call for indicators. And so national entities, NGOs were able to sort of present those and submit those, hence creating a pool of indicators for the experts to work with. And so I see a comment that this is the first webinar on understanding and unpacking the global goal on adaptation that they have attended, so that tells us that we need to continue this conversation. And indeed, we shall continue this conversation in the next 2 pre-COP webinar series under the Llama project. So yeah, really looking forward to that. Which actors and sectors are being left behind in the GGA process? Again, community actors strongly being left behind. And I think you can appreciate that from the conversation that we've had with our indicators are reflected at that level. And I think some sort of answer has been reflected upon, that is engaging with the national processes, then so that these national entities are able to present the country, an accurate country position when they interact with the UNFCCC discourses. Another really great point brought out by Professor Gilmore was that now the Adaptation Fund is gearing towards funding even local entities, community actors. And so that really shows you how the global processes are trying to ensure that these entities are not being left behind under the GGA. What type of local adaptation metrics indicators in your work could be most effective? Again, see some responses on increased yields, better adaptive capacities, more training programs, when you talk about equity and strengthening vulnerabilities in adaptation discourses, that really needs a whole other load of unpacking. But yes, these are some of the indicators that participants have put out there as being most effective in their setting. So thank you for interacting with our poll. We will be sure to share the presentations from our panelists, and some of the materials from IPAM I think would be really useful and crucial. Carl is here, Charles is here, that really appreciate that sort of engagement from the policy from the policy level, the community level, academicians, the government level. I think that would be really useful and great. At this juncture, I'd like to invite Dr. Isaiah Marquette to close this for us, but not before telling you about the upcoming ARIN Climate and Health Conference. This will be coming to us. Save the date for October 21st to 24th, the Environment, Climate Change and Health Conference in Nairobi. ARIN and partners are going to be engaged in that conference from October 21st to 24th. If you're part of our emailing list, you'll definitely get this information. And at the rest of the webinars that we're going to be having, the second webinar, the third webinar, really useful discourses that we look forward to building up on from this first one. Dr. Marquette, please confirm that you can hear me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Leah. I hear you very well.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'd like to begin by appreciating Charles for bringing us to speed in the understanding of the GGA process. I must confess that when I heard about the 9,000 indicators for the first time, I got astonished. But I appreciate from today's webinar that this is a huge undertaking. And from all the presenters, they confirm that this is indeed a robust process. So thank you, Charles, for bringing us to speed in the entire discussion. I'd like also to thank Carl for bringing us the understanding on the GGA process, by appreciating that indeed the matrices are sort of becoming fragmented and disconnect from the practicality, and also appreciating the urgent need for developing a usable and scalable as well as coherent indicators. And this was also amplified by Professor Elizabeth, who actually brought the appreciation around the work that has been undertaken, even to scale down from the 9,000 indicators towards 490, and the quest to move this further to 100 indicators. But also she mentioned that there is need to anchor this from the technical expertise perspective. And she mentions many challenges around this, the challenge around implementing this to reflect the financialization aspects. And also I like the term she used on the tension part in terms of the framing of the GGA and in terms of the things that we should prioritize. So from all these discussions, it points us to what awaits us in terms of not just developing these globally relevant indicators, but they must be reflective of the local needs. And also the presenters here appreciated that the GGA process should be approached in a proactive way by developing workable instruments that will guide the resources to be placed where they are most needed. And Professor Elizabeth actually mentioned robustly on the aspect of financing, which sort of reflects the country-specific and country-dependent in terms of what is reported. So just to wind up, I'd like to point out to you on what or some of the things that we are undertaking. Leah mentioned the aspect of climate change, environment, and health, which is one of a kind conference ever held in Africa, which Irene is a part of, and we'll be hosting that in Ole Sereni Hotel somewhere around October. So we are working with many partners. We are working with the Ministry of Health here in Kenya, Ministry of Environment, and many other departmental organizations within the country. We have also the biggest climate change and health network, that is CHANCE, which is a part of this. And we have had series of engagement, and we believe that this is going to be quite informative. We also have, or we are driving other initiatives, the Africa State of Adaptation, which we are co-running with the AAI, Africa Adaptation Initiative. And this is one of its own kind, which points out the Africa status of adaptation. And the good part of it is that we are linking this to all the thematic areas around the GGA. So we ask you to be posted, and even that we have your contacts, we'll keep you posted on many other things that we are driving as ARIN. At this point, I'd like to thank everyone who turned up for today's webinar. My colleague Edna mentioned the forthcoming webinar series, and we'll be keeping you posted on that. The coming one, Edna, I've seen she has mentioned, we have one on 8th August. The other one will be on 29th August, but final details around this will be communicated to you. So thank you once again for taking your time to be a part of this insightful discussion. Over to you, Leah. Thank you so much.
All right, and that brings us to a close of our very first pre-COP webinar series on the global goal on adaptation, unpacking the global goal on adaptation. I'd like to invite everyone to open their video. Let us take a final photo for evidence. We are all about science and policy and evidence. I'd like to invite everyone to just put on their video so that we can take a quick photo for record purposes. I see a question from Cindy. Is it a hybrid conference? Yes, it is, and we'll be able to share more information with you on that. Lovely to see all your faces here. Kindly media team, confirm that you're able to see us and take our photos. I know researchers are very serious, but I think a smile can be okay. We have somewhat understood the global goal on adaptation, so I think we can be happy. Are you media team? Is that okay?
Yes, it is okay. You can share that beautiful smile. Okay, we are done. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, and see you in the next webinar.
Bye-bye.